Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Emma Blake, urology and men's health expert. Today, I want to talk about a story that is both fascinating and deeply human. One that challenges a lot of the myths men carry about size, masculinity, and sexual confidence. This is the story of Matt Barr, the man recognized as having the largest scientifically verified, unaugmented penis in the world. His measurements are extraordinary: 14.4 inches in length and 8.5 inches in girth. Now, when most people hear that, they assume it must be an incredible advantage. Bigger, in our culture, is often assumed to mean better. But as you'll hear, Matt's experience is not what you would expect. Having an anatomy far beyond the average has created challenges in his relationships, his mental health, his intimacy, and even his day-to-day life. And that's why I think his story is important to share here. Because it highlights something men rarely hear. Being average is not only normal, it's often ideal. Matt first became known publicly when he appeared in a documentary titled My Massive Cock. The documentary put him in the spotlight, but it also reinforced stereotypes. People assume that size on that scale automatically translates into sexual dominance or effortless confidence, but Matt described his reality as the exact opposite. To put his size into context, let's talk about averages. Scientific studies place the average erect penile length at about 5.2 to 5.8 inches. If we look at distribution curves, what's called a bell curve, we find that only about 2.5% of men are 2 standard deviations above average. That puts them in the 7 to 8 inch range. Beyond that, men are extremely rare. So when you think of Matt, who measures more than 14 inches, you begin to understand why he is essentially in a category of his own. He is not just big. He is off the chart. And here's the key lesson. While society glorifies size, biology sets clear limits. What is glorified in pornography or cultural jokes doesn't reflect real-world compatibility or intimacy. For most men, and most couples, being average is not only enough, it's preferred. But what about Matt's actual experience? Did it give him endless confidence and sexual power? No. When I asked him about it, he said something striking. "I don't have the big energy people expect. I've always been shy, maybe as a way of compensating for it." He admitted that his anatomy often made him feel more different, more judged, and less confident, not more. He even compared it to what some people call pretty privilege. Yes, it got him attention, but it also reduced him in people's eyes to one feature, making it harder to build genuine connections. And this is what I want men to take away right from the start. Size doesn't guarantee confidence. Confidence comes from health, self-acceptance, communication, and presence. Things every man can work on, regardless of anatomy. Matt's awareness of his difference began in school, and it wasn't subtle. Like many boys, his first real comparisons happened in the gym showers. But unlike most, other students noticed immediately and started talking. Word spread quickly, and before long, he was known for something he hadn't even fully processed himself. Now, from the outside, some men might imagine that would feel like a compliment. But Matt described it as deeply uncomfortable. He wasn't ready for that kind of attention. His body had developed faster than his emotional maturity, and while his peers might have seen it as entertainment or curiosity, he experienced it as objectification and bullying. He remembers classmates pressuring him to prove it, or even trying to coerce him into showing erections. At the time, he didn't even have the language to describe what was happening, because culturally, we almost never talk about men being sexually objectified. But that's exactly what it was. And while some men might imagine attention like this would be flattering, the reality is that it often left Matt feeling anxious, isolated, and ashamed. This is an important point I want to emphasize as a physician. Objectification harms men too. Just as women can be reduced to their bodies, men can also feel judged exposed, or harassed based on anatomy. And when that happens, during the already confusing years of puberty, it can shape confidence for decades. When it came to intimacy, Matt's first attempts at sex were not what he hoped for. In fact, his very first experience wasn't real at all. A girl from school expressed interest, but when they tried, it simply wasn't possible. Instead, they agreed to spread a rumor that they had slept together, more for social status than truth. It wasn't until much later that Matt had what he considered a real attempt at penetrative sex, and that ended painfully. His partner experienced significant discomfort, and they even had to seek medical care. This is where anatomy and biology come into play. The vaginal canal, on average, is about 3 to 3.5 inches deep when unaroused. With arousal, it can lengthen, sometimes up to double that, but still generally no more than 6 to 7 inches. For someone of Matt's size, penetration can be not just difficult, but often unsafe without adaptation. This reality forced him to learn something early that many men don't appreciate until much later in life. Penetration is not the definition of sex. Matt explained that he had to quickly understand the importance of foreplay, creativity, communication, and attentiveness. He admitted that his first attempts were awkward and clumsy, but over time he became more thoughtful and careful. In his words, "I had to work so much harder to make sure my partner was comfortable, and in the process, I became a much more conscious lover." And I think that's a powerful lesson for every man listening. Good intimacy is not about anatomy. It's not about size. It's about connection, care, and communication. Whether you're average, smaller, or larger, the key to a satisfying sexual relationship is understanding your partner, being adaptable, and focusing on the bigger picture of intimacy. From a clinical standpoint, Matt's story also underlines another truth. Average size is ideal. The vast majority of couples are anatomically compatible within the average range. Extremes, whether very small or very large, are much more likely to create challenges. So if you're a man who is ever worried about not being enough, I want you to hear this clearly. Average is not only normal, it's healthy, practical, and preferred by most partners. One of the practical challenges Matt described, something most men never even think about, was simply practicing safe sex. For the average man, condoms are widely available, easy to purchase, and designed to be flexible. They're tested to stretch far beyond what most people would need. But at extreme sizes, even the largest commercial options didn't fit Matt properly. This made them prone to breaking or slipping, which created both anxiety and risk. Eventually, Matt found custom-fit condom manufacturers, companies that specialize in protection tailored to different dimensions. These provided better solutions, but even then, it required practice, preparation, and patience. For him, using protection wasn't just about choosing a brand off the shelf. It was a process of trial, adjustment, and sometimes frustration. From a medical perspective, this is important to understand. Condoms are highly effective when they fit well. But just like clothing, a poor fit, whether too loose or too tight, compromises performance. For men at extremes of size, this becomes a genuine barrier to safe, comfortable intimacy. But beyond logistics, Matt described something deeper: the psychological toll of living with extreme anatomy. He explained that while some people might think of size as an endless advantage, he often felt reduced to just one body part. Instead of being seen for who he was judged for something he couldn't change. People assume it's a positive, he said, but realistically, it comes with a lot of drawbacks. At times, this pressure even made him wish he were smaller. He admitted that he researched the possibility of surgical reduction, looked into medications, and even tried non-medical approaches like hypnosis. None of them worked, and in the end, he had to come to terms with the fact that this was something permanent. This is where his story takes on broader meaning. Many men spend years worrying about being too small, believing they are inadequate compared to unrealistic cultural portrayals. Yet here was a man at the opposite extreme, wishing to be less, not more. It shows how misleading and damaging cultural messages about size can be. The truth is that average is functional, average is compatible, and average is healthy. Extremes bring complications that most people don't consider. And of course, the constant attention also weighed heavily on his mental health. Dating was difficult because he often worried about rejection at the most vulnerable moments. Instead of feeling empowered, he sometimes felt anxious and ashamed. Far from giving him unlimited confidence, his size often undermined it. From my perspective as a physician, this highlights something I see too often in men. Body image issues are not exclusive to women. Men, too, suffer under cultural myths and unrealistic expectations, whether about size, strength, muscle, or performance. And when those expectations don't match reality, it can hurt self-esteem, relationships, and even willingness to seek help. Matt's story reminds us that masculinity, confidence, and intimacy cannot be measured in inches. They're measured in how you show up for your partner, how you communicate, and how you take care of your health. One of the most eye-opening parts of Matt's story is the way pornography and cultural myths shaped expectations, both his own and those of his partners. Culturally, we are constantly bombarded with the message that bigger is always better. Pornography, in particular, reinforces this. Scenes are staged to highlight size. Performers are selected for extremes, and camera angles exaggerate what's already unusual. For many people, especially young men, this becomes the reference point for what sex should look like. But as Matt explained, real life is not like pornography. On screen, everything looks effortless. In reality, extreme size requires extensive foreplay, careful communication, and often adjustments or even devices to make intimacy comfortable. He shared that he sometimes used penetration buffers, medical devices designed to limit depth, because otherwise sex could be painful or even impossible for his partners. He emphasized something that really stood out. Sex for him was rarely spontaneous. It often required planning, preparation, and reassurance. While some partners were curious or excited initially, many found that the reality did not match their expectations. In fact, Matt estimated that only a minority of women reacted positively to his size. A larger percentage declined penetration altogether, preferring other forms of intimacy instead. And this is critical for men to understand. What women may imagine or fantasize about often does not match what feels comfortable or pleasurable in reality. This is also reflected in research. Studies show that most women actually prefer men within the average range. Data on consumer behavior supports this too. Despite the availability of oversized sex toys, the vast majority of women purchase products modeled after average anatomy. That's because comfort, satisfaction, and emotional connection matter more than extremes. Another expectation Matt often faced was the assumption that he must be highly confident, experienced, and constantly thinking about sex. After all, society paints a man with his anatomy as some kind of unstoppable lover. But Matt describes himself as shy, reserved, and even having a relatively modest sex drive. He jokingly called himself a sexual camel, sometimes going long periods without much interest, and then having phases of activity before pulling back again. In his words, "People always think, because I'm big, sex must be on my mind all the time. It's not. I'm just like anyone else, sometimes interested, sometimes not." This mismatch between expectations and reality often created awkward or even painful experiences. Imagine being in a relationship that's going well, only to have your partner back away the moment intimacy becomes real. For Matt, this was common. Instead of feeling empowered, he often felt rejected, frustrated, and misunderstood. And here is where his story carries an important lesson. Sexual satisfaction depends far more on compatibility, communication, and comfort than it does on size. From a clinical perspective, this is absolutely true. Research consistently shows that what partners value most is not size but attentiveness, connection, and confidence. A man who communicates, listens, and adapts is far more likely to be seen as a great lover than a man who simply measures above average. Over the years, Matt developed ways to cope with his unique situation. He admitted that his early experiences with intimacy were filled with insecurity and awkwardness. But with time, he learned how to navigate relationships in a healthier way. The first key, he said, was communication. Instead of waiting until the last moment, he learned to be upfront with partners about what intimacy might involve. Not in a boastful way, but in an honest and respectful way. Because for him, surprise was rarely a good thing. It's a lot to spring on someone, he explained. So I've learned it's better to talk about it once we've built some trust, rather than wait until the very last minute. He also focused heavily on foreplay and non-penetrative intimacy. For Matt, intimacy couldn't rely on penetration alone. Sometimes it wasn't even possible or comfortable. Instead, he learned to prioritize his partner's pleasure in other ways, reminding men everywhere that sex is not defined by just one act. Another important coping strategy was experimenting with positions and tools that made things easier. He described using devices like penetration buffers, custom-fit protection, and even something as simple as pillows to control depth and comfort. It was trial and error, but he eventually built a toolkit that allowed him and his partners to have satisfying intimacy without unnecessary pain. Matt also talked about the importance of managing expectations. He said, "Some women assume this will be amazing, and then realize it's not for them. That's okay. Not everyone is going to be comfortable, and you have to accept that without resentment." This is powerful advice for every man, whether you consider yourself small, large, or average. Not every partner will be compatible. Not every experience will be perfect. What matters is respecting boundaries, being adaptable, and remembering that intimacy is a shared experience, not a performance. When I asked Matt what advice he would give to other men who struggle with body image or size concerns, he offered 5 key points. Don't let size define you. Whether big, small, or average, your body is just one part of who you are. If you let it consume your identity, you will limit yourself. Know your body. Be realistic about its strengths and challenges. Understand how it works and adapt accordingly. Be attentive to your partner. Not everyone will be comfortable with every part of intimacy. Respect that. A good lover is defined by attentiveness, not anatomy. Dress smart. For him, this meant clothing choices that minimized unwanted attention. For other men, it may simply mean wearing clothes that make you feel confident and comfortable. Redefine intimacy. Good sex is not about replicating pornography. It's about connection, creativity, and communication. Explore all the ways you and your partner can share pleasure, not just one. And finally, Matt emphasized communication again. Sometimes things don't work out, he admitted. But if you're open, respectful, and willing to talk, intimacy becomes much easier to navigate. From my perspective as a urologist, I think his advice is spot on. We live in a world where men feel immense pressure about size, yet Matt's story shows clearly that size alone is neither a guarantee of satisfaction nor confidence. The truth is this: most men are average, and average is ideal. It's compatible, it's practical, and it's exactly what most partners want. What truly matters is confidence, health, hygiene, communication, and the ability to be present. As our conversation wrapped up, Matt reflected on what his unusual life experience had taught him. Not only about sex, but about himself, relationships, and society. He admitted that growing up, he sometimes felt spoiled by the attention. Women who might not otherwise have noticed him suddenly did, purely because of his reputation. But as he matured, he realized that this kind of attention wasn't always genuine. It didn't build real connections, and often it carried more objectification than intimacy. He also spoke about the cultural myths around size. For decades, magazines, films, and pornography have pushed the narrative that bigger is always better. But if you look at real-world data, the truth is clear. Most women prefer average. Studies consistently show that the majority of women are happiest with partners who fall within the normal range, not at the extremes. In fact, consumer data backs this up. The most commonly purchased sex toys are modeled on average anatomy, not oversized versions. What this tells us is that real-life pleasure and intimacy are not about extremes, but about comfort, compatibility, and connection. Matt also pointed out that size is far less important in long-term relationships than communication and trust. He reminded me that in the early 2000s, with lad culture magazines promoting the idea that size equaled masculinity, he often felt confused when partners reacted negatively. Over time, he realized the disconnect. Cultural myths did not align with real-world desires. His key message to other men: don't let size, large, small, or average, consume your identity. Don't buy into cultural myths that set unrealistic standards, and above all, focus on the parts of intimacy that matter most: respect, creativity, and communication. From my perspective as a urologist, this is the most important lesson of all. Masculinity, health, and satisfaction cannot be measured in inches. They are measured in how you care for yourself, your partner, and your relationship. So to every man listening, I want to leave you with this: your worth is not defined by size. The healthiest, most confident, most attractive version of yourself comes from taking care of your physical health, your mental health, and your relationships. That is what truly lasts. Now, before we close, I want to share something practical for men who ask me how to maintain their erections, stamina, and vitality as they age. Lifestyle, things like exercise, sleep, stress management, and a balanced diet always come first. But I often recommend safe, science-backed supplements to provide additional support. That's why I suggest 2 carefully selected options. You'll find links to both in the pinned comment and video description below. For men who want a moderate natural boost, I recommend organic watermelon extract, which is rich in L-citrulline. This compound supports nitric oxide production, improves circulation, and helps maintain firmer, more reliable erections. But for men ready for a bigger transformation, not just circulation, but also testosterone, stamina, libido, and prostate health, I recommend an advanced formula that combines Icarian, horny goatweed, to support blood flow, hardness, and stamina; Tonkat Ali to boost testosterone and overall vitality; fenugreek to enhance libido, energy, and orgasm intensity; nettle root to promote hormone balance and prostate support; and of course, citrulline for nitric oxide and vascular performance. Together, these ingredients target every aspect of men's health: blood flow, hormone balance, energy, stamina, and prostate function. So whether you want a moderate lift or a more comprehensive solution, you'll find the links to both options below. Take care of your health, your confidence, and your relationships. Because intimacy is never about size. It's about trust, connection, and living fully in your body at every stage of life.